Alrighty guys, welcome back to another chess endgame for beginners lesson. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to checkmate with one rook. Now, if you watched the last video, you saw how to use the box pattern with one queen to checkmate. This is going to be kind of similar. However, a rook and a queen do have some differences. Mainly, you need to be a little bit more careful with your rook because this enemy king can indeed attack it from angles, unlike a queen. So if you didn't watch the last video, I'll just give you guys a real quick briefer on the box technique. Essentially, what we're going to do is we are going to trap the enemy king inside a box. In other words, we're going to limit the amount of squares that he can go to. And as this king moves around, we are going to gradually shrink that box until essentially the king has nowhere left to go. At that point in time, when the king only has a few squares left to go, we're actually going to be using both of our pieces to work as a team. One of these pieces, essentially the king, is going to be blocking it in, and the rook is going to be able to deliver the final checkmate. So I usually like to start at the beginning at a random position and kind of show you guys the steps one at a time. But in this case, I actually want to show you exactly the position that we're going to end up in because it's a little bit more complex than the other mating patterns that we saw. So, like I said, eventually we're going to want to push this king to one of the edges of the board, ideally a corner, and our king is essentially going to be opposing it. Now, if you ever hear the term opposing kings, what that means is that you have two kings, let's say the white king and the black king, and they are one square apart, either on the same rank or the same file. Now, the reason that we want this position is because once we have opposing kings, right here, our king on g6 is blocking any of the escape squares for this black king. It's just like back rank mating whenever the three pawns are in front of the king. And at this point in time, we can just go ahead and bring our rook up from b6 to b8 and checkmate. The king has nowhere to go. So this is kind of the position that we're aiming to get to. And now let's go ahead and figure out how exactly to get there. Alright, so let me go ahead and throw some random pieces on the board. I'll get a white rook, white king. I'll play white as usual. And we'll put the enemy king right there. Now let me go ahead and click done. And I will play this one against the computer level 10. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to start positioning our rook in a way that we can essentially cut this king off to the least amount of space possible. We want to box him in. Now, I am looking at moving over here, but if I do that, then the king can move over here and I won't be able to protect my rook in time. I can also think about moving my rook up, checking this king, and yeah, I think that might be the best idea. So let me go ahead and just move my rook up, and right now the king is kind of in this bottom right area of the board. So I'm going to try to push him in that general direction. So I'm just going to move my rook over, and whenever you're doing this, like I said, you're going to want to end up with both your king and your rook close together. But whenever you're just creating that box and you want to keep shrinking it and shrinking it, your rook is a lot more effective of shrinking a box because it can just move faster across the entire board at a time. So first say, okay, how can I make the box shrink with a rook? If I can't make any improvements, then I'm going to go ahead and start moving my king towards the king. So I'm going to move my rook over here. And alright, so this king is moving around, but it's still confined to this area right here. Now, since if I move my rook here, that it's just going to get captured. I can't really move it here or else the king's going to escape this way. What I want to do is I'm just going to move my king down. It needs to be close to my rook anyways. So now that the king moved down, I can go ahead and move my rook down. And as you can see, this box is shrinking even more. So now, can't really move my rook here or here. So I'm just going to go ahead and try to improve this by moving my king down. Alright. So again, same thing. Any place I move my rook, it's either going to be ineffective or be captured. So just going to improve my king's position. And alright, just continue the same thing, shrinking, shrinking, shrinking the area. So now that the king moved right, I can actually move my rook right. And as you can see, the king is just running out of space. Now, if you get to this position where you're like, all right, I can't move my rook here or here. I mean, I can move it here to e4, but then the king can just escape this way. All you can do is just take your king and pivot it to another square. So then it forces the king to move to a square that it probably doesn't want to and just continue with the same pattern. So all right, shrink, and there we go. So now we got this king to a pretty tiny area. And again, another thing that you want to take note of is you want to avoid stalemates. So make sure that you don't end up in a position where the king is not in check, but it cannot move. So just, that's another thing you want to watch out for. That's one way you can botch this endgame, other than, accidentally moving your king away and the king can just capture your rook. So with that being said, let's just go ahead and follow our plan. Keep shrinking this area, shrinking this area. All right, so we are now to a point where we decided that we are going to trap this king along the H file right here. So essentially, we know that our king needs to be opposing it. So we're going to go ahead and bring them out to the F file and get them in position. Again, as long as it's one square away from this rook, then the king can't really escape or threaten us in any kind of way because the rook is still defending all of these squares and the enemy king can only go to these squares right here. So we can pretty much position our pieces set up for our checkmate. So I'm going to go ahead and set that. Again, tighten this little design even more. And all right. So now if I click my rook, you can see that it's now controlling this, 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 and of course, I guess this counts right here. Kind of makes it a prettier little diagram. But the enemy king can essentially only be swapping between h1 and h2. So with that being said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start marching my king down to right here. So I'm going to move right there. The king doesn't have any option. It just has to move up. And then once I get my king down to f2, it's going to be in a prime position where it is opposing the enemy king, controlling these three squares. And now, once this is the case, again, we forced all these moves on the enemy king, we can just go ahead and move our rook to h3. Oh my god, I got kennel cough or something. And deliver the final checkmate. Boom, roasted. Now, if you guys were watching that game and you're like, wow, I saw like a much quicker checkmate. That seemed like it took a really long time. Again, I'm not teaching you guys the most high level or fastest checkmating patterns. In this tutorial, I just want to go over the box strategy, the idea behind it, not just, the most optimized way to checkmate the enemy king. So just like the last video, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you guys one more example. If you already have it down pat, then go ahead and move on to the next video. But for those guys who want to see one more example, then yeah, let's go ahead and set one up right now. So I'll go ahead, set up a new position, clear this out. Actually, let me put a rook down here. I'll put the king kind of far away. And all right, good enough. So let me play this. And let's see how we do. So I think that in this example, the king is pretty close to this area of the board. So I want to keep him in the bottom left quadrant. So I'm going to go ahead and move my rook up just like that. Now I'm going to be wanting to move my rook over here. But in order to do that, yeah, let's go ahead and just do this first. Because I was worried about the king coming up here and attacking my rook, but my king can actually get there in time. So now what I want to do is, since I can't move my rook here will allow it to escape. If I move it to e4, it's going to escape to c5. I'm just going to move my king on e7 over to d6. Alright, so the king is moving to an area I didn't want to move him to, so just to push him away, I'm just going to pivot my king to another square and continue with the rook. So you can now see that this box is slowly closing in. However, I'm going to need to help with my king to kind of help this pivot action. And alright. So now if we move our rook on c5 over to b5, it's going to be protected and the king since the rook is covering these squares, it only has a few squares left to go. So let's go ahead and try to shut those off pretty quickly. Keep moving the rook down. Keep the king as an anchor. And alright, so now we're in the same situation where the king, the enemy king, only has 2 squares to go. The rook is essentially protecting everything else. Now I'm just going to position my king to get in a position, I say position like 40 times. If anyone knows another word for position so I don't have to say the same word over and over, let me know. But yeah, I'll get my king in an area where it can be opposing the other king. So let's go ahead and do that right now. And again, remember the whole time, no matter where I march my king, it's defending my rook, which is essentially the pivot of this fence or the corner of my fence. So it's just a really good strategy to do it that way. Kind of doing 2 things at once. So I moved my king down, he moved up. Again, he's just going to toggle back and forth between A1 and A2. And now for the last 2 moves, I'm going to take my king, move it from C3 to C2. Again, now my king is blocking this enemy king from escaping in any kind of way since it's controlling all the blue squares. And now what I can do is move my rook over and deliver the final checkmate. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Boom, roasted, toasted. Alright, so mating with 1 piece is obviously a little bit more difficult than mating with 2, but I recommend to just kind of do what I did. Go on chess.com or whatever website you want. I'm sure a lot of them have this feature. Go ahead and set up a new position, throw a rook there, and just practice. After like 2 or 3, you're going to get the hang of it, but for now, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.